Welcome to the final 2024 Financial Architects podcast. It's my pleasure to have partner and chief investment officer Larry Steinberg with me today. And the election is in the rearview mirror, Larry. You heard about it we're not here to sway your political opinion. We're here to interpret the results. That's right. We're interpreting the results. And you heard it during election season that Trump was polling better on the economy. You are a financial planner, advisor. Trump won the election. So first off, I guess, what would be the number one financial takeaway you would take away with Trump winning?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think Trump is going to be more pro-business and pro-growth. He's going to be very much about streamlining and limiting regulation. He's going to be very much pro-energy development. Although, the Biden administration had in the last, year and a half of their administration actually freed up a lot of drilling and had made that go faster. I think that they were doing that for political reasons, that they wanted more energy development to help keep energy prices down and help the economic numbers. But regardless, Trump is going to be more pro-energy, but I don't think that difference is going to be as big as some people think. But definitely more pro-business, pro-development. And, he's going to be very big on trying to bring jobs back to the U.S.
Well, you mentioned pro-business, and that seems to be a theme out there, that he is, in fact, going to be more pro-business. Can you unpack that for me a little bit? How, in fact, he will help businesses? Are we talking about small business owners, medium-sized businesses, large corporations, all of the above? And how is he going to help them?
So, I mean, I think that whenever you talk about pro-business, that there's you can't put all businesses in the same category. Big businesses, giant companies are very much different than small independent businesses, family-owned businesses. What can be categorized as small family-owned businesses can be, by a lot of people's views, large. But I mean, there is a big difference between large corporations and individual businesses run by people on the ground and not by boards of directors. And so I think that the Trump administration is going to be putting in deregulation that's going to help the smaller and mid-sized businesses proportionally more than large businesses. And the reason I say that is because oftentimes very large corporations can use regulation to their advantage to stifle competition, right? They can have an entire department that is, as far as dotting the I's and crossing the T's with regulation. And very often smaller businesses, and I run this, I run into this personally in the couple businesses that I'm running and involved with, right? Where, the minutia of the rules spend a lot of time and effort, right? And if you make a mistake, your fines or your whatever can happen can be debilitating, versus larger businesses. The fines can be a rounding error, but they have a team of people that are helping them deal with that. So very often regulation is a tool big businesses use to stifle competition. So I think a Trump administration is not necessarily that they're altruistic and wanting to help smaller, mid-sized businesses, but the view of deregulating and creating less regulation is going to be more pro mid and small size business than it is going to be larger corporations.
Evan Makovsky here on the Financial Architects podcast with Chief Investment Officer and partner Larry Steinberg. We heard about it during the election cycle about Trump putting tariffs on foreign goods, a universal tariff. And again, I don't know if this is official, of 10 to 30% on all imports and as high as 60% on imports from China. How much of that is realistic? How much of that do you expect to get put into motion?
So I do think the tariffs by their nature are inflationary, right? However, what the Trump administration is putting out here is that, they want to do the tariffs because they want to create and make trade fair, right? And that these are negotiating tactics in order to level the playing field. And I do believe that has a tremendous amount of merit. When I was studying economics in college, we would read about these trade deals the U.S. would have with Japan, and they'd have these side deals where, we were going to deregulate, and make it easier for them to sell cars here, but they were supposed to open up the the Japanese market to California rice, right? And then they didn't. And so it was always that we would live up to our side of the bargain and the other countries wouldn't live up to their side. And I think that has been true for, as long as I've been an adult, right? Is that, the countries make deals and they say they're going to liberalize trade and they don't, right? And a lot of times it's not fair. We've had, my entire last 40 years of my life, I consistently see, that country says they're going to do this, they're going to do that. They don't do it. But when they're selling to us, like, we live up to all of our obligations, right? So I think what Trump is saying is that, hey, look, we're tired of getting the raw end of these economic deals with all these other countries. We always live up to what we say, and then other countries don't necessarily do it. So I do think that it's a carrot and stick approach, and that the stick is tariffs, and that he's seriously going to put some tariffs on countries to get them to come to the bargaining table and make fair and free trade deals, right? The other thing we got to understand about the tariffs is that it's a kind of an extension of the Biden policy, which was an extension of the Trump policy post-COVID, which was that we have these supply chain issues where we're getting stuff that we absolutely are important to our economy that we need from foreign countries, and that we can't count on it, right? I mean, we're talking about a green revolution in energy, but we can't do it without Chinese rare earth minerals, right? And, we have access to them in the U.S. We just don't want to mine them here because it's dirty to mine, and we would rather have it done in China. But that makes us vulnerable, if we're going to do green energy, to having inputs that come from China. Same with medicine. A lot of medicines were in short supply for a period after COVID because we couldn't get the inputs in from China because China had shut down their economy. So I also think that in addition to looking at the tariffs, we also got to look at it from a national security and a national economic security point of view, which is that we can't be dependent on countries we don't necessarily get along with for certain important inputs into our economy. And therefore, we should use tariffs as a reason, as well as deregulation, as a reason to start getting them here when we can, or getting them from Canada and having them do the same thing. Right, or getting them from countries that are much friendlier to us, because we can't be dependent on certain inputs from countries that we're at odds with, like China and Russia. So I think that from the smart thing, and this was happening under Biden too. So this is not a Trump thing, but it's a thing that we have to look at, is that we're trying to bring those inputs back to the U.S. and get them done here. And I think that's very important. But it is going to be inflationary, right? Getting some of these things from the U.S. where it's more expensive to pull them out of the ground because we actually care about the environment and try to do it cleanly and try to not have people die in the process. Where in China, China still has hundreds, if not thousands, of people dying in coal mines every year because they don't really care about worker safety to the same extent that we do, right? So I think that part of this is going to play as this reshoring that's going to happen. I think the biggest difference there, though, is China was kind of backdooring trade through Mexico. I don't think the Trump administration is going to allow that to continue. If they sell to Mexico and then Mexico sells to us, I think that they're going to put whatever China tariff is existing, they're going to put it on a throughput based on, percentage of the goods that are actually manufactured in China. So I think that it's going to do a lot of rearranging, right? And it's going to be good for jobs. And I think it's going to be good for the economy overall, but is going to make it much more difficult to bring inflation down in the short term, which is why Trump has said that, he's backed down on, that he can bring inflation down quickly, right? He's backed off of that campaign promise because, frankly, it was an unrealistic campaign promise. But politicians always make unrealistic campaign promises, but at least we're kind of understanding now where he's going with that.
Unpack this for me. You talk about unrealistic campaign promises, but you hear the kind of talking points for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party is that, as far as taxes go, Donald Trump, doesn't care about the middle class. The Democrats were going to give tax breaks to the middle class and down, and they would, the wealthier folks would pay more. Now that Trump's in there, take me inside of how it will work with taxes here. Is the middle class going to get screwed by taxes?
Well, I mean, the tax cuts are always good for the vast majority of people who are paying taxes. Even if they don't directly get those tax cuts to the people that are investing and doing things frees up more money for growth and development. So as far as, tax cuts screwing the middle class, I don't think that's ever been true, right? The reality is that no matter where taxes have been historically, the federal government ends up collecting 18% of GDP roughly. There'll be a change, it'll go off, and then it'll come back to that kind of median or norm. So tax policy should be driven about what's going to do the most growth, because that's going to bring the most revenue to the government, and it's going to provide the most jobs. So tax policy should not be focused on, I want to help this person, I want to help that person. It should be strictly based on what's going to be best for growth. And that's off of economic work that was done by Stephen Moore in the Reagan administration. And I think it's been proven absolutely to be true that the tax collections aren't going to, you cut taxes, you get less necessarily. In fact, historically, every time they've had tax cuts, revenues to the government have gone up because people less work focusing on, they spend less effort working on trying to avoid taxes and more effort on growing their businesses because their return is higher there. So I think that we need to get away from this. It's middle class, it's upper class. It's going to help this person. It's going to help that person. We're one country. We're all in this together. We want things that are going to develop growth. That should be the focus, and that should be irrelevant of party. And let me just say that, you can't look at things as Republican versus Democrat, because in essence, there's really four political parties, in my opinion. There's kind of middle of the road Democrats. Then there's like the far left Democrats, the squad types, right? Who have gone from, that the rich need to be taxed, not because the country needs the money, but because they need to be punished. I don't think that's where the majority of Democrats lie. And then you've kind of got the old line Republican, that is waning. And you've got this MAGA Republican, which is more focused on, we need to actually shrink the size of government. We need to do less. I don't really personally fit into any of those because, some of my opinions are anathema to all four of those groups, and they wouldn't take me. But the big picture here is that Trump doesn't have the ability to put in all these tax policies or any of these policies that we want. And we've just seen this with the battle over the, God, what have they been fighting the last couple of days over the extension of the budget, right? The spending cap. So they couldn't get it done. It was very difficult. We had old line Republicans got a deal with old line Democrats. It got shot down. Trump brokered a deal. It got shot down. And they finally had to do something more in line with what Trump talks about rather than what Trump was willing to accept. But the difficulty of that shows you that there's just not a ability for the Trump administration to go in and do things. They've got the Senate, they've got the presidency, but they've got a 3-person majority in the House. So it'll only be 2 persons until April because he took one of the House members into his administration, and so there's nobody in that spot. And, in prior Trump administration, they couldn't get votes passed because they were having dozens and dozens of Republicans defected. And in fact, in this last budget bill that they just did, all the Democrats voted on board, but a bunch of Republicans didn't do the deal. So there is no unity in the Republican Party to move a lot of this agenda forward. And, they really have kind of 2 years to even try to do it, because I don't remember any time historically where in midterm election where the sitting Republicans party, the sitting president's party has gained, right? Trump in the first time lost 40 seats. And that was historically low for, the loss of number of seats. So I don't see him necessarily being able to go in and expand that. So I don't think that, they're going to put in massive tax cuts or be able to do a lot of this because it'll never get through Congress, especially the old line Senate. So what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to focus on executive orders and what he can do on the administrative side. So that's going to be less about taxes and more about immigration and deregulation. I do not think we're going to see a bunch of massive tax decreases get through. I could be wrong, but they're going to need a bunch of Democrats to jump on board to do that. And I'm not sure that can happen. It could. We're already seeing Democrats saying they want to work with the Trump administration in certain areas. But I think that in the tax side, I don't know that we're necessarily going to get a bunch of tax cuts here. I think we may be lucky to get an extension of the prior tax cuts. I'm really hoping on opportunity zones, because there's bipartisan agreement on that they can do an extension of the Opportunity Zone Act. That's something that we use a lot in our tax mitigation practice. But I don't think people are realistic about what a Trump administration can even accomplish in these areas. So I think we need to be ready for the Trump administration only being able to act kind of on the deregulatory side and on the trade side and on the immigration side. I don't know that they're going to get a bunch of tax decreases through.
Okay, Donald Trump said this before he got elected and after he got elected. Day one, I'm going to do mass deportations. How is that going to affect the economy?
Well, I think it's going to be positive and negative for different sectors in different areas, right? It's going to be rough on construction. It's going to be rough on, areas like that. It's going to be rough on manufacturing that are used to using, labor that may not be here legally in their practices so that they can pay people less, right? But that's going to be like a third wave, right? So we don't even know when that will happen. So anyone that talks about the mass deportations, we need to listen to the specifics. The devil's in the details. They are initially going after the gang members and the multiple criminals and the people that have already been ordered to be deported and have just chosen not to, right? So a lot of the people that have come in the last couple of years, they haven't had court dates yet where they're for deportation hearings, and they've been granted temporary asylum. And you could argue whether that's legal or not legal, but I don't think the Trump administration is going to go there. I mean, they've got three initial priorities, right? People that are violent criminals that need to go, and I think that everybody should be in agreement to get rid of the violent criminals, right? The ones that are committing all these heinous acts. And that's I don't know how many of those are, hundreds of thousands to maybe a million, but there's a lot. Then they're going to go after the people that have had their day in court and have already been ordered deported. And then they're going to go try to find the 300 to 500,000 missing kids, right? We've got kids that were let in and missing, right? That's a lot. Like for them in the first 2 years to even get a portion of that done is going to be difficult. So I think the mass deportations of people that cross the border looking for a better life, I think that's years down the line. So I don't think there's going to be this big negative economic impact from immigration, because the people that are just kind of here, working and, they may be under the table and that needs to get cleaned up, but they're not, those people have nothing to worry about right now. They're not the main target, right? They're going to go after the criminals. They're going to go after the people that have already been ordered out, and they're going to go try to find those kids. Like that is a lot. We got 340 million people in this country. Just to get that portion done, that is, that's a lot of people. And if they can get that done in 2 years, maybe then we talk about the next 2 years, they're going after other groups of people. But I just don't see that having any economic impact in the short term. If anything, it might have a positive economic impact because, getting rid of violent criminals and robbers and out of your society is always going to have a positive economic impact.
Last question. We heard during the election and after the election that Donald Trump won because of grocery store prices. And gas prices aren't terrible right now, but you can lump in during the Biden administration, they have been very expensive. How is Donald Trump going to get that down, both grocery store prices and keep gas prices from doing what they've done the last 4 years at times?
Well, so, the big thing is this is a very contrary opinion. I think that any Republican candidate would have won this election. It wasn't Trump. I think that the economy was so bad and the tone deafness of the Democrats to what people were actually going through, trying to say the economy was good when you dig past the headline numbers, it wasn't and hasn't been for a large portion of the people. Like this wasn't a Trump thing that any Republican would have won. And I think other Republican candidates would have probably won by more, because there's a certain segment of Republicans and other people that would have been open to a different Republican that were just vehemently anti-Trump. So I think that any Republican candidate would have beaten Biden or Harris. And that, this mandate that people talking to is more a press creation than anything else. I think any Republican would have won, because you can't win when you have a 30% approval rating. I mean, you just can't, right? And Biden and Harris, are the same candidate for all intents and purposes. Now, that said, I think that the economy, kind of my summary or conclusion overall, I would say is that, and I've said, we've talked about this before. It didn't matter who was going to win. Certain economic problems are there. And I think it's going to be a difficult 2025. I really think it's going to be rough, right? We've got, the Yellen, for political reasons, in my opinion, was financing the debt through short-term borrowing, through 6 months, 3 months, 6 months treasuries, and that game is over, right? We've got a massive amount of debt to refinance, and Doge, even if they accomplish their wildest expectations, isn't going to get this budget balanced, and we've got roughly $5 trillion of debt to be rolled over or issued next year. They're going to have to do it at bigger, in longer duration. They're going to have to be selling 5 and 10, 3, 5, 10-year notes, treasury bonds. They just don't have a choice. And the interest rate effect on the economy is going to be huge. And, the fact is that I'm a big believer that the bond vigilantes are going to come back. And just because the Fed lowers the rates doesn't mean that the actual treasury rates are going to go down. Like we saw this after the first rate cut, right? Mortgage rates went up after that 50 basis point, and the reason for that was when they're selling treasuries in the open market, there has to be buyers, and the buyers have to be willing to pay. So they can issue a 10-year treasury at 3%, right? At $1,000 par, but it's an auction, right? If people are only willing to pay $950 for that because they demand a 4% return in order to take on that risk, that drives the mortgage market, that drives the lending markets. So I don't necessarily think that they're going to be able to get those costs down, and I think that's going to spell trouble for the bond market, and that's going to spell trouble for the stock market. And I really think that people that, all the people that have this, and I'll use the Greenspan term of irrational exuberance over Trump coming into office. And I will readily admit Trump did much better with the economy in 2016 than I thought he was going to. I thought he wasn't going to be able to do a lot of what he did, and he exceeded what I thought was possible then. Maybe he'll do it again, but I just see 2025 as being a difficult year. And a second reason for that is I think that when you're talking and listening to people in the Trump administration about their game book, they're really kind of looking at the first Reagan administration, their first term in office, which was that they ripped the Band-Aid off on a lot of economic stuff and took the pain early. And as a result, Reagan was hugely unpopular initially. But by the time they got to his reelection campaign, the economy, the Band-Aid had been ripped off, things had turned around. And I really think that that's what Trump is looking to dictate that playbook, to take as much pain as they can next year in order to have things going the right direction down the line for a reelection. And I'll say it right now, I don't think J.D. Vance is going to be the next Republican presidential candidate. I think Trump's going to want to put one of his kids in. Now, whether that actually happens or not, I don't know. But I do think that Trump is going to want to put one of his progeny or maybe Kushner, in as the next president. He wants Trump's to be like the Clintons and the Bushes, right? Where, it's a there's more than one family member there. I think Trump is very big on his legacy, and that, he's not looking at it as I'm a lame duck and do whatever I want. I think he's looking at it as he wants to propel another Trump into the White House. Like I said, that no one's talking about that. I'm going to say it right now. But I think that for that very reason, they're going to push as much pain into next year as they can so that by the time they hit the midterms and definitely the next presidential, the economy will be on the ascendancy and they'll be much more popular. So I think that we really need to be worried about 2025. I think that the stock market and bond market are going to have trouble. There's a lot of people who I've research I follow who are talking about how mega cap stocks time may be done, and they may be a bad area to be investing in. And I think that we're looking at, energy and some of these other areas as being good areas. But outside of that, I think the economy is in for a rough go.
Well, Larry, who's not in for a rough go is the viewers of the Financial Architects podcast in 2024 or 2025. You'll be right there with them. They should reach out to you. They should tell their friends and associates about the wisdom that you provide right here. So I want to wish everybody a happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. For Larry Steinberg, I am Evan Markovsky. This is the Financial Architects Podcast, and we will see you on the next episode next year. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Evan.